Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for these questions. These were the questions that were put into chat, and we unfortunately didn't have a chance to actually cover them while we were on the live session. I'm recording a little piece here, just going through the questions and giving you the answers as I read them, so very much live, and we'll see where we go. First question here is about company culture. And it says, what criteria do you use to tell whether a company has a healthy neurodiversity culture? And that is a very challenging question. And the reason I say that is simply going and checking off the box that they have this program or that program really doesn't prove a whole heck of a lot of anything. For instance, I know of one global company that does have a Autism at Work hiring program, and it's hired one person in a year, which obviously is not saying a whole lot. I think the way that I would look at it is how would I evaluate it is not the check the box factor, but look at things such as, is the interview process being done in a way that is not biased against people who think, perceive, and process in a different manner? Some other things would be, is there training when you are both onboarding somebody and all the people that are there already? Have they you been given training to even have awareness and understanding of what neurodiversity is and how neurodiversity can affect the interactions with individuals who do fall into the different neurodistinct categories? I would also look for is managers. Are they being trained to manage neurodistinct employees? And not just are they being trained, but is there something tied in? I would say this should count for all diversity, not just neurodiversity. Is there something tied into their evaluations that they need to be proactively doing something about creating a more neurodiverse and a more generally diverse environment at all? And I'd say lastly, probably I would look at accommodations and how are accommodations from neurodistinct groups handled? Are they handled as something that is essentially a gatekeeper approach where you've got to have the doctor swear up and down that this is what the person needs, and then you decide if you want to do it or not? Or are they handled from the standpoint that giving you the thing that's going to make you more productive is going to be just good for business, and we're going to give those people that need things? For instance, if somebody has a challenge with vision, it's very common to just allow them to have and provide for them a screen reader. But unfortunately, many companies make accommodations for neurodistinct conditions, something that requires a whole medical approach and proving that it's actually valuable, which is a little bit crazy when you look at the statistics. If you just go on to askjan.org, and JAN is Job Accommodation Network, there is a little bit about a cost of accommodations, and roughly on average, accommodations cost about $500. And reality is, when you look in the list they have for the various neurodistinct conditions, you'll see that the vast majority of accommodations are free. So I think I would really look at how easy is it for somebody to get an accommodation? Is it being done in a way that makes them feel as if they're being included, or is it done as a way that makes them feel as if they're being given a special dispensation and granting of special privileges just because they need something to be equitable and at the same level with everybody else in their involvement with the company? So long answer, but I think that's pretty much how I would look at it. And again, those aren't really so much check the box kind of things. A few may be, but really it's a much more of really just diving in and looking deep into the culture itself. Next question, there's some about resources. And it says, as far as I understand, masking can occur without necessarily knowing you're doing so. More is learned behavior from negative past experiences. Are you aware of any good resources which might help an autistic person with identifying masking behaviors? This is pretty interesting, to be honest. I would say that If you are doing a behavior that, and of course, masking means that you're altering your normal behaviors and doing other behaviors, purposefully to make yourself more acceptable and more like the other people that you're involved with at the moment. So it may change depending what group you're with, what level of person you're talking to, and such. I look at it as masking is when you're doing these intentionally and you can recognize the drain it's causing on you in order to do them. If you're doing them, you've gotten to the point that you're now doing them subconsciously and you're not noticing any drain, I don't consider that masking. I consider that as learning behavior that will be more effective in the general world. Not quite seeing why I would want to know when I'm doing things that have, now made me interact and be accepted, more at a higher level, I don't know what you would call that, whatever you would call that. I want to say more better, and that's a terrible sentenced way to put it, but I think you get the idea. If it's something that you've accommodated and you've integrated that in, and bad experiences certainly are great teachers of what you need to change in your life. And if you've integrated in so that it's not creating additional stress on you, I don't think it's actually masking. And I don't know why I would want to identify it so I could try not to do it when it's already showing that it's being very effective for you. So I think the real answer on this one is, my definition of masking is doing something that is taking extra resources, effort, and energy in order to fit in, not doing something that through repetition or through previous bad experiences, you've integrated into how you now interact, and you do it without applying any extra effort. The next question on resources is, in terms of the discovery about the gut-brain axis in the past couple decades, are there resources you'd recommend for optimizing brain functions for neurodistinct individuals? Well, yes, there's definitely a lot of study that has been done about the gut-brain connection. This is certainly not an area that I am an authority by any means. I'm not trained as a medical doctor or a research scientist in any of these areas. But I can give you my personal view on it. And my personal view on it is that there's lots of people promoting lots of things that may be effective for a particular individual, but may not be effective broadly. And mistaking that as being a solution and avoiding all other solutions at the same time is likely to be harmful. And why this can happen is there's a thought that autism is not a specific single issue, condition. It's actually a variety of issues that manifest in very similar ways. And that is also true of a number of the other neurodistinct conditions. And of course, each condition has different pathways that it works, different things that it affects it. I think it really comes down to, when it comes trying the different, we'll say, more natural or alternative type remedies, first, evaluate it. Is it something that makes sense at all? There was something circulating on, I don't know, the internet, we'll say, I think it was Facebook, but who knows, probably got on a bunch of them social medias, about, I think it was Clorox enemas for autistic children. Well, that's just plain ludicrous and going to do nothing but cause harm and medical problems. Now, altering your diet, eliminating certain things out of your diet, changing what the particular diet that you're doing, as long as it is nutritionally valid diet, it really comes down to, you got to try it and see what works for you, because everybody is an individual. The causation is individual to each person. The challenges that they have are individual to everybody. So there's no real blanket statement. I am actually working on I guess I'd say, research project as part of an advisory committee that is looking at the toxic load level and how toxins in the body will increase or help cause higher levels of the traits and challenges that are associated to different neurodistinct conditions. This particular study is looking specifically at autism. And interesting in the preliminary research that I have seen, the toxins that are the highest as far as causing impact in functionality are actually toxins that come from primarily automobile exhaust. So it's not something that necessarily improving or changing the diet is going to improve, because it's an air quality issue. And we certainly know that air quality issues, unfortunately, tend to impact marginalized groups far more than non-marginalized, just because of the distribution of living and highways and such. I think based on what I've seen, I would say looking at some kind of diet that focuses on trying to remove toxins and not weird, wacky, bizarre kind of toxins. We're talking very normal kind of things like xylene and toluene and benzene and variety of different versions, of chemicals like that. Anything that would help remove those from the body are likely to be helpful for all of us, to be honest, but maybe even more so for individuals who are neurodistinct. So really, the advice on this one is it's so individual, but it does seem that the research is leaning towards, and this is stuff that's peer-reviewed, research done by well-known, well-regarded scientific institutes and scientists, not stuff done by one doctor that is claiming they have the cure and there's no support besides their own personal support. I would say that, look towards things that would be oriented towards detoxing on particularly air pollutants. Next, we have some communication issues. And it says, can you touch on acronyms? Is there any evidence to show that using acronyms might be a barrier to communicating with certain neurodistinctions? I'm not aware of any evidence. I think it comes down to with acronyms. Acronyms, I think, are the challenge for everybody. And the problem is people use acronyms without making sure that everybody that they're communicating with knows the meaning of the acronym. It's so common that we use whatever the particular acronym is in our particular field, that when we're talking to somebody else, we just assume it's common knowledge. I think there's a problem with us humans that we forget when we learn things. And after we've learned it and it's been a week or two, we just assume that we've always known it and everybody else should always know it also. I think that's really the only challenge with acronyms, is making sure that it is not used with people that don't know what it is. So the safest thing to always do, because you don't know in your given audience, whether it's one-on-one or one on a group in a conference room, you don't know who may or may not know it, is the first time that you use an acronym, actually give the definition of what it is. For instance, if I were simply to say that I have ASD, then I should, I can't assume that everybody's going to know what ASD means. I should say the first time I use it in that particular group, I should say something like, I have ASD, which, by the way, is autism spectrum disorder, and whatever the rest of my sentence is. So I think that's really the biggest challenge, is that you have to make sure it's defined in the moment. Otherwise, you have probably lost a number of the neurodistinct individuals for different conditions, because if they can't understand that one acronym, then the rest of it just makes very, very challenging for them to make sense out of it because they're now missing a big chunk of the conversation. I know with autism, we tend to not assume. If we don't know what it is, we're not going to try and guess what it is and try and make the sentence work. We're simply going to lose context at that point. Again, just first time you use it, whether it's with anybody. If it's one-on-one, you might just say, after using the acronym, are you familiar with that acronym? And if they say yes, great. If they say no, just tell them what the acronym actually means. If it's with a group, I wouldn't even ask. I would just say, I have ASD, that is autism spectrum disorder, and go on from there. And I think that would eliminate any challenges because, as I said, I haven't heard of them being specifically a challenge, but there's certainly in the way we process, if you don't understand a word, some of the neurodistinct conditions will have much more challenge trying to follow the conversation if they don't know a key term that's involved in it. Another one is, do you, Tim, also have to learn to use body movements to express yourself while speaking? That's kind of a yes and a no answer, to be honest with you. The yes is, I did study with a playing Broadway actor, and part of what he taught was just becoming more comfortable in your body and comfortable with movement. And he introduced us to, so this is kind of, not only did he talk and help with different exercises to help in that area, but he also introduced us to a technique that's called Alexander technique. And Alexander technique, if you look it up, is actually widely known. It's used by a huge, huge range of actors. So it's very common in the acting field to learn to use Alexander technique. And I was fortunate to be introduced to it by what's considered one of the top teachers in the method. He actually had coached the cast of Hamilton to learn how to move like French royalty, because French royalty didn't move like most of us move these days. So Alexander technique definitely did help me just get more accustomed and feel more comfortable with my body and my body moving. I would say, just as an example, we in one exercise, we were at a theater. There was about 200 of us there, and they had us go around in the theater acting out as an animal. And I personally chose to be a lion, or I can't remember if it was a lion, a panther, a tiger. But at any rate, you get the idea, a big cat. So I was crawling around on the floor on my hands and knees and acting as a big cat, which tended to be a popular thing. There were lots of us that were big cats, but there definitely other people chose other animals that they wanted to emulate. But what I found that did is when you're in that position, you have your hands now up here, because you obviously can't crawl on your hands and knees with your hands down by your side where most of us hold them when we're speaking. And that just gave me a much higher comfort level with having my hands up in the air where you can see them, and then actually using them to motion. The other part of it was, as part of the vocal training that I did with, again, one of the top, or probably the top vocal trainer in the world, he also taught about gesturing and how to use gestures. So that helped reinforce now I was more comfortable with my hands up in the air, and he helped teach me about how to use gestures. And just as a little tip for everybody, save you a whole lot of money that I paid to learn this, he warned that the worst thing you can do is what's called parallel gestures, where you're always moving your hands exactly identical, because humans don't move their hands exactly identical normally, unless you're a bad politician. And when you look at the bad politicians, they're always moving their hands exactly like this, and it looks totally ridiculous because it's just fake, it's staged. Instead, move your hands. If you're going to go like this, just move one up and one down. Just keep them moving around in different ways. So that definitely helped me then understand what gesturing is and how to use it, combined with now being more comfortable with having my hands up in the air. And then I'd say the last thing, and this came again out of the vocal training, is as I was able to add more melody and more music and tonality to my voice, it is almost as if automatically that starts driving movement and gestures. I'm a horrible dancer. I really don't get dancing at all, to be honest with you. But I think it's sort of like dancing, that the music of your voice drives movement in your body. So those would be all the things that combined that, yes, I did do training. It wasn't specifically for, it was involved with other pieces of training, but I definitely did do training that involved gesturing and using, body language and such. See, next question we have here is under your personal story / being in the workplace. Were you ever struggling with your job due to being neurodistinct, and afraid to ask for what you felt like you needed, or maybe didn't know what you needed to succeed from your manager, HR, and how did you conquer that fear? In parentheses, fears could include feeling stupid, getting labeled, feeling incompetent, getting fired, etc. No, I never felt like I was struggling and needed to ask for help, to be honest with you. I just got fired because I wasn't aware enough to recognize that I potentially did need help in certain areas. Now, if you are fortunate enough to recognize that you could use help in certain areas, I think it comes down to, I'm not sure how to explain this one exactly, but we'll give it a go. I have this idea that came about from, before I was diagnosed as being autistic, didn't know why people were or how things were different from me. I made the assumption that everybody is like me, which I think all of us make because we only know one human experience, and that human experience is ours. So we project that human experience on everybody else. And then we start going with they're like me, but, which is probably completely backwards. It should probably be they're nothing like me, but now let's find the similarities. And we can then find out where we have differences and find the value in those differences. But the point being is, as far as fear, I think, and this is not tending to be an autistic challenge, because as autistics, we tend to not process the emotions or feelings very well. They frequently don't end up being information in our brain that we can do something with. So in other words, the sensations that create emotions aren't translated in our brains to something saying, oh, you're scared, or those kind of things, until it becomes extreme. And I have seen variations in that. Of course, we're all individuals, so not every autistic's the same. And in general, I would say I have seen, this is totally non-scientific, but I have seen that female autistics tend to be more aware of emotional, things going on around them, but have challenges in how to respond. Male autistics tend to just totally miss the point that there was anything going on at all. Again, gross generalization, but kind of an interesting point as I've learned about it. So I think this really comes down to, you've got to notice. And if you do notice, then the question I think is really, how do you overcome the fear? And fear, as I said, before I got diagnosed, my working premise was that the world was stupid. And now I wouldn't say it's an effective premise, but it was my working premise because I got things and they didn't. So what else are you going to assume when you think that they're like you, but they don't get it? Afterwards, I recognized that the problem wasn't the world was stupid. The problem was a communication challenge of basically just a disconnect of the way I thought, processed, perceived, and communicated was not received in the same manner on the other side, and vice versa, which in the presentation, we covered that very briefly. We could have done the whole presentation just on that, but we just covered it topically. And that made me start thinking about what is it that is causing me to not be able to act and interact with other people the way that they do. And it finally dawned on me that the challenge was I didn't have I'm going to say map, a concept, a construct in my brain that I could look at to analyze the situation and come up with what would be appropriate behavior. And it can't be just rule-based because there's way too many rules to human interactions to just make it rule-based. So I needed, again, I think of it as a map. You need to navigate the city. Nobody knows which place you're going to need to go. So you get a map, and the map allows you to then adjust as you need and is appropriate for your starting point and your destination and the modality of your transportation. That got me thinking about what would be a good map. And I came up with a map of a small group of individuals that are living together. So maybe it would have been back in the wild, wild west times of America, where you had settlers that had created a small village that was pretty well self-contained, didn't have a lot of interaction with the outside world because they weren't on a main route by any means. Or it could be back, again, we look at, various areas of the world. There's various times in the growth of civilization that you had bands of small groups of individuals that acted as a single group. And those groups tend to be very, very rigid. The leader of the group tends to stay being the leader until they die. And there's very little mobility because it's very tiny and everybody has their place and everybody knows their place. And I think evolutionary, that's where the fear comes from, that we're afraid that we are going to be exposed to that group, which is what we depend on for our survival, that we're going to be exposing ourselves in a way that is going to make us feel shamed or that make them look down upon us and diminish our standing. How do you overcome that? Well, you just have to understand that it's a logical fear. I've heard the way saying fear is actually an acronym for false evidence appearing real. And in most cases, it is. If you went to HR, if you talked to a manager that was open to having a discussion, I think you would frequently find out that they are trying to help and want to help. So the fear of what's going to happen is really false evidence, but you're making it appear as real. How do you get yourself over that? Well, there's a variety of different techniques. You can go to therapy for however many years it takes. That could help get you over that. You could certainly go and study. There's very, very many self-improvement style type coaches that can do wonders in helping you understand how to be more powerful, forceful. I hate to use those two terms because they sound negative, but how you can be more of yourself and let that open to the world than capping it in because of some level of fear. So I would say pursuing any of those would be very, very useful. The therapy takes a long time. A lot of the self-improvement kind of coaching can happen much, much more quickly. And then, as my vocal coach puts it, you can go to therapy to be more confident for 10 years, or you can simply learn to sound confident. And if you sound confident, people will assume that you are confident. So that's actually the shortcut. Learn to sound confident. So any of those or in any combination is probably how to overcome the fear. And once you've overcome the fear, it's then very easy to reach out and ask for what you need. Once you recognize that most people are going to try and help you. And I think if worse comes to worse, if it does end up in, which I think most people would consider the worst thing, I mean, feeling stupid, getting labeled, feeling incompetent, so what? I mean, that's a inner problem that you just need to accept that don't feel that way. It's because somebody said something that they wanted to make you stupid. It's them who has the problem for not understanding, accepting. You're not the one who's stupid because they weren't open and willing to be unbiased and willing to accept that different people have different experiences and different needs. I think hopefully that covers it. Now, the worst one, getting fired, if it's an organization where you just have to hide all the time, you can't get any help and are totally afraid you're going to get the help you need, and you get fired, it might be the biggest blessing you've ever had. It can be rough. It can cause, economic hardship. Been there, done that multiple times. And usually it was for the better because the next thing led me further along my path, which finally got me to here. Continuing on with the questions after a whole day of working and a little bit of a break, here we go. The next question up is actually very similar to the previous question. And it says, were you ever afraid to ask for what you feel like you needed to succeed from your manager / HR or company? And how did you conquer that fear? And I'd say pretty much that matches exactly what the last one was. So really not much to say about it other than we just need to recognize that fear really is just false evidence appearing real. Fear is worrying about things that really won't do anything to you. It's not going to harm you. It's just going to hamper you from getting where you need to get to. And if you don't speak up, you're never going to get what you need. Other than that, I'd say just listen to the answer to the previous question where I dove into it in a little more detail. Next question is, how did you realize your natural talents or strengths to contribute to the workplace? I think it was really more by failure than by anything else. Just doing things and finding out where I failed at it made me recognize where things could be different that would make it that I would have succeeded. And I do believe in universal design type approaches. And not only would it make me succeed, but it would also help everybody succeed. Again, being autistic, which is just one little section out of the neurodistinct category. But looking at it through my perspective, I think I see that it's quite common for people who are neurotypicals to not go and actually speak up and find out or try what they think that they're capable of doing because they are afraid of the fear, the embarrassment, those type of things. Fortunately, as being autistic, sometimes not picking up those emotional cues and those things that would make others potentially feel as if they were harmed, as if they were put down, being felt made stupid, those kind of things. We tend, or I tend at least, again, we're all individuals, it's going to vary, but for me, I don't really notice them, to be honest, which makes it very easy to just move forward with what I think is worth giving a try and find out what works and what doesn't work. Also, I think part of what has really helped me quite a bit was both I did take in the 1 year of college that I took, I did take marketing. And I also, in both my earlier careers and in my own business, did a fair amount of marketing. And marketing is all dealing with delivering the message that the people want to hear in the way that they want to hear it. And I think a lot of that has helped me in the workplace in recognizing what it is that could be communicated in a way that would improve the reception of it and improve the understanding of it. So I think that's kind of how I found some of my strengths. And part of them were just things that I developed over the years. I've always been one of those kind of people that will just get out front and lead because nobody else is doing it. And that has certainly been a strength in a lot that I've done. And I guess other things were teaching. Something I've always enjoyed doing is teaching and helping other people. When I was working as a consultant for multiple years, I think probably it's about 10 or 12 that I did consulting as my full-time job. I always would go into a place with the goal of improving somebody's life. And it didn't matter whether that was giving them a new job skill, giving them a new way to approach challenges in life, or what it was. I just wanted to leave having made somebody's life a little bit better. So I think those are some of the strengths that I've just developed over the years and recognized were very helpful when I got into the workplace. And just thinking about it, I used to listen a lot to a gentleman named Jim Rohn, Rohn. And Jim has passed. Jim was, he billed himself as a business philosopher. And he had a very, very simple way to explain his philosophy of life. And I would say it was transformational in my life and gave me a lot of ways to look at things that are very different from the way that we tend to look at them without the influence of a strong mentor like Jim was to me. I did meet him once in person, so most of his mentoring was through his books or through his, at that time it was cassette tapes, so it gives you a little idea how far that goes. But I know his material is still available out there, and I would suggest giving it a listen. Very interesting gentleman, has very, very interesting ideas. One that's just popping in my head of one of his little sayings is, if you have somebody that's going in, well, how does he put it? If you have an idiot, don't just motivate him, because all you end up then is with a motivated idiot. So again, just very, very down-to-earth approaches saying, hey, if somebody just doesn't get what they're supposed to do, just getting them to jump up and down and get excited is not going to solve the problem. You need to get them to turn around and head in the right direction before you give them that motivation. So again, I would recommend him. He was definitely helpful to me over the years. And I always do enjoy when I do happen to run into one of his pieces or listen to one of his clips. It definitely brings back to me all of these great thoughts that he did provide that have been so influential in my life. Next question is, I think autism may often be viewed as something where folks may have mild social or communication struggles, but are very gifted and talented people. Do you think it's safer, in quotes, to disclose autism opposed to other types of diversity where an employer can benefit from some of the special skills some autistic individuals may possess? Well, I think the important part on this particular question is right at the end, where the person is actually saying that it says where some autistic individuals may possess. It's very much a stereotype, and like all stereotypes, there generally is some foundation, but they are generally also not fully true either. And yes, there are many people who have forms of autism, one that used to be called Asperger's, which is what I was actually diagnosed with in the DSM-5. DSM is the Diagnostical and Statistical Manual of Mental Health something. But that is what the therapists and psychiatrists use to actually diagnose the different conditions. And over the years, they do change it. DSM-5 came out, and it eliminated the category of Asperger's and just put it into the category they now call ASD, so Autism Spectrum Disorder. And within that, they'll refer to it as either HFA for high-functioning autism, or they'll refer to it as level 1 autism. Personally, I still like the Asperger definition because I believe it was much more accurate for the individuals who fall under that. And the doctor who came up with it, Hans Asperger's, was actually a pediatrician and worked with children. And he found that there was this group of children that socially had troubles in some communication, definitely in social interaction, but they were very bright. He called them his little professors. And we've gone and now created that as being the stereotype for autistic individuals. And the reality is, autism is a spectrum. And what a spectrum means, and it's often confusing because people often think of autism spectrum as being a continuum. Continuum is where you have one point over here that this is very, very bad. Over here, this is very, very good, or very little effect at all, and that you can put anybody up or down that line. Well, that's a continuum. That is not what a spectrum actually is. In medical terminology, a spectrum is when you have a group of potential symptoms, so we'll say, or it could be traits we might use, and that in any particular individual, you would have a different combination and intensity of each one of those traits. In other words, it's multidimensional. You can't put it on a single line because it is actually a multidimensional aspect. It's much like looking at any of our personalities. You can't put a personality on a linear line. There's too many variations in it. It just doesn't fit that way. Now, we may be able to simplify a few things and try and force it in there, but then we've lost a huge amount of information. So I think the point I'm trying to get to is, first off, the assumption that somebody who is autistic that has less communication or social challenges is going to have some special super gift is a false assumption. You can have low impact as far as the social and communication abilities and not be a genius. On the other hand, it is true that statistically, there is about a 3 times, maybe 2.5 times greater prevalence of autistic individuals having IQs above 120 than there is of the general population. Again, you can see that's where the basis of the stereotype comes from, but there also is a statistically much higher chance that you're going to have an IQ that is under 80, which would be considered having intellectual disability at that point. In other words, just being autistic, even if you have low impact in some of the areas such as the social and communication, does not mean you're going to have some magic skill. With that said, the other part of the question is, do you think it's safer to disclose autism opposed to other types of diversity because an employer can benefit from those special skills? Well, the reality is it doesn't matter what form the diversity takes. Either it's diversity because we came from a different race, whether it's diversity because we came from a different country or culture, whether it's diversity because we have a different orientation in who we're attracted to or how we identify. All of those things would be different forms of diversity, certainly in neurodiversity, ADHD, dyslexia, dyspraxia, on and on and on. There's many different named conditions and certainly plenty of non-named conditions that are people who definitely think and perceive and process in a distinctly different manner. All of them bring special traits. And what they bring is their special trait, above all things else, is a unique perspective, a unique way to look at a situation. And that really is where the value comes from, is having that alternate perspective, but only if you use it. Now, that doesn't mean you have to take their perspective every time, and that is the solution. I will say, when people ask me about what makes you feel like you belong, I say, when I have an idea and people will consider it as if it could potentially be a viable solution. Now, they may have other solutions. There might be a better solution for somebody else. A hybrid of a bunch of different people's may end up being a better solution, and maybe it does include a little of mine. But it's not the fact that they take the solution, it's the fact that they consider it as potentially being viable. And I think that's the thing we need to look at. It doesn't matter what diversity group you come from, whether it's in neurodiversity or more traditional diversity. We always have to look at everybody's perspective as potentially being viable to help with whatever the situation is at hand. I guess what I'm coming down to is I would say, regardless of what diversity group you fall into, if it's one that is an invisible diversity, like ADA, ADHD, dyslexia, autism, are generally invisible. You can't tell the person has it unless, something major happens that is associated with that condition. And if you have an invisible disability, I think it's much like now we use pronouns when we're dealing with anything LGBTQ plus. We have all learned to give pronouns because somebody can't just look at you and see what your gender identity is and what your orientation is. And I think it's important that we tell people what it is so that they can then recognize that, oh, you have a different perspective. Let me hear that perspective because that perspective could be very valuable. I'll be honest, I've adopted the pronouns and some people say hijacked it, but I think I'd just say extended it. When you think about why did we start using pronouns? We started using pronouns so that people could understand who we were in the area of gender identity and orientation because they can't tell it by just looking at us. Well, you can't tell I'm autistic by just looking at me either. So I actually list my pronouns as being autistic, he, him, his. And I think that is entirely sensible because, just because it came out of the LGBTQ plus arena, it really is a valuable thing that we understand who the other person really is. They came up with a great idea. I think using it is a smart thing to do. And I put my identity right in along with that so that you now know, hey, Tim's autistic and he is cis male. Makes it easier for all of us. And also now you can understand where I can bring a perspective, what perspective I'm bringing to the table. So my point would be, no, not just for autism. I think you should disclose for any of them because every single condition, every single diversity brings great value in and of itself. Next one is a group of a couple questions dealing with managing or relating with others. And the first one is, what is the best way to deal with a neurodiverse person who, due to their neurodiversity traits, or neurodiversity treats others as being inferior to themselves due to their perception of being superior in very specific areas? Well, that is a very great question. And I have seen that being very common with people with Asperger-style autism, particularly that have gotten higher education levels, masters, PhDs, and such. I do want to back up for just 1 second, though, and just point out some language pieces so we can all be working on the same ideas of language. And the first one I just want to point out is you can't be a neurodiverse person. Neurodiverse is an adverb, so neurodiverse refers to the makeup of a group. If you have a group that has a variety of thinking, perceiving, and processing styles, then you have a very neurodiverse group. But you can't have a neurodiverse person because a person can't be an adverb. I use the terminology of neurodistinct, which is a noun, and a person can be neurodistinct as opposed to being neurotypical, meaning that more cohesive, larger group that tends to set what the norms are. So just a little minor point there of neurodiverse refers to a group's makeup, and neurodistinct refers to, an individual who is not neurotypical. So besides that, now we'll get to actually the question. You're right. It can be very frustrating, to put it mildly, when somebody is acting as if they're speaking down to you. But you need to look at it in the perspective of what is really going on. When you are autistic or many other, virtually all the other neurodistinctions, and even many neurotypicals. We get picked on continually. And if I've been told in my life once, I've been told a billion times, Tim, why can't you be like everybody else? Tim, why can't you do things like everybody else? In other words, I'm always being told that I was never good enough. I didn't measure up. I wasn't doing it the right way. So if you think about it now, this is a person who is bright. They have great cognitive abilities, even though they may have poor communication or social abilities. And they go through college and they go on and they get, let's say a master's or maybe even a PhD. And they are very, very proud of what they have accomplished. They finally have something in their life that they can objectively hold up and say, look, I am worth something. And unfortunately, it gets a little carried away, particularly with autism, because we often have an inability to understand how what we're doing affects others. That's referred to as sensing that is going on with others and that they can think differently than we do is referred to as theory of mind. And autistics tend to have poor theory of mind. Again, we're all individuals, some better, some worse. I am not really good in theory of mind areas. So you have this person now, though, that has made a great accomplishment. I mean, it's something to be proud of, but they don't have the social finesse nor the understanding of how it is affecting and the reaction of other people to them using their, we'll say, PhD level words all the time. I actually job coached a gentleman who that was the challenge he was having, was people always felt like he was talking down to them. And when you use big, huge words that other people don't understand, the first reaction of the person that is receiving those is, geez, I'm feeling stupid because I don't understand what he's saying. And then we tend to turn it around and go, no, I'm not feeling stupid. They're an arrogant jerk. And we then assign essentially intent of why it is that they're using those words to make us feel stupid. And then we just reflect it back as they're an arrogant jerk, when the reality is they are just being proud and demonstrating what they have accomplished because they've been put down their entire life. So what do you do about it? What's the best way to deal with it? It really takes somebody that can explain to that person how using those terms causes their listener to react in a way that, first is they start feeling stupid because they don't understand and can't follow the language that they're using. It's too high a level language for the receiver of the communication. And then secondly, they need to really understand that when you make somebody feel stupid, and there's many ways to do it besides using, fancy language, just going and speaking way too fast will tend to make people feel stupid because they aren't able to catch your message. So the worst is if you use big fancy words and go too fast, now you're really going to make the recipient feel stupid. And because nobody wants to feel stupid, you try and look at where is it that's causing you to try and feel stupid, and it reflects back into making the person an arrogant jerk. And once they can start understanding that that is the reaction that's going on and it's causing them harm in the workplace, besides the harm it causes to their coworkers, there is the potential that they will start modifying their behavior. So it's not intentional. They're not doing it to try and make you feel stupid. They're doing it really in a way to try and help alleviate the bullying, the putting down, the sense of worthlessness, essentially, that as autistic individuals, we frequently develop as we are growing up. Next one is, how do I encourage someone who believes is neurodiverse, again, neurodistinct, or one of the specific conditions because they are in a group, to open up and highlight what help is needed? To make it worse, if the person does not know what help is needed, how do I approach this situation? Any advice? Yes, there is very simple advice. When there is a challenge that is going on in the workplace, who cares what is driving it? Is the challenge that they're speaking up out of order in meetings? They're whatever, it doesn't matter. Fill in the blank, whatever the thing can be. Who cares what's driving it? We are now dealing with a behavioral issue. There's a problem with the person's behavior. So we don't even have to go and approach the fact that we think they may belong to one of the neurodistinct categories. We just need to deal with that particular behavior and point out to them that that behavior is not acceptable, but there's a variety of things that we could do. And maybe the behavior could be that they're not getting their projects done on time. Well, we can then help them understand that there is a variety of things we can do that could help you with getting organized and getting your projects done on time. And we don't have to say, hey, I think you have ADHD and that's why you're not getting your stuff done. So now let's try and figure out how we can get your projects done on time. Just go straight to the behavior and forget the why. If that person feels like actually disclosing, if they do know, maybe they'll disclose when you actually have the show the kindness and empathy of trying to help without trying to pin some kind of labels on them. Maybe they don't know at all, in which case just helping them with behavior, I'm sure they would be appreciated. I know I would be appreciative if you would show me that a behavior I was doing had a way that we could remedy it and improve my performance, whether it's because I have autism or whether it's because I grew up on a farm and didn't learn some of the fancy ways that the city folks had. So just approach it as you would approach the challenge, no matter who the person is. Focus on the behavior, not on what drives the behavior. Now, the conversation may be different. You may have the conversation a little differently if you're thinking that they are neurodistinct, because you may need to explain it a little different, but you're still focusing on the behavior, and then you're just adjusting your communication to the individual like you would with any individual. Somebody who didn't have a great command of English, you would probably slow down, you would use simpler words, things like that. So we do adjust for other, cultures, we do adjust for other diversity groups. But we adjust in the explanation. We don't adjust in saying, oh, because you have, this is the problem. No, the problem is the problem. Doesn't care what it is you have. How you explain it and possible solution could be related to or altered by what it is that you perceive they have. And then the last one is, would Tim talk more about the case where someone is constantly interrupting in meetings? Well, there's a very simple way to handle interrupting in meetings, and it is certainly not a trait that is exclusive to being neurodistinct or being autistic within the neurodistinct category. There are many, many, many neurotypicals who also interrupt in meetings. And that's very simple. You need to lay down rules when you have meetings. Meetings aren't free-for-alls. If the rules that you set for the meeting are only one person talks at a time, and when they're done talking, then we will go to the next person that raised their hand or motioned or however you want to signal that you want to talk. I remember I went to marriage therapy with my wife, and they introduced us to the idea of the talking stick. And the talking stick could really be any piece or any object, just something easy to hold and pass back and forth. And the only person that could talk was the person that had the talking stick. And the other rule that you do need to apply with that is some fixed limit of how long they can talk, because you just can't hold the talking stick and dominate the conversation for half an hour. But think of it, the talking stick method, where you're simply, okay, whoever has it is the person that can talk. Nobody else can talk until they have the talking stick. And the person talking, that's it. No more than 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever may be appropriate before you need to pass the talking stick to the next person in line. And if you implement those kind of rules, it doesn't matter who the person is, what their background, what their diversity is. We now have created a situation that the rules will cause the meeting to run in a good and proper order. There are such things as rules of running meetings. I can't remember the names. It's Rogers Rules of Meetings or something like that. But there are actual formal rules to run meetings. And we need to go back to formal rules of running meetings and not letting be free-for-alls, which is what we've often let meetings evolve into. And that is the end of all the questions that we have. And I really do appreciate all of you asking all the questions, the engagement that you all had, the interest you had. Absolutely amazing. I have to say, amazing kudos to Andrea for what she has done in diversity at help systems, because you wouldn't have the level of engagement that I'm seeing in this if somebody wasn't doing a great job in making diversity a key part of the organization. And kudos to all of you for being willing to accept that there are things to learn. We can improve. We can learn to accept people that are different from us. So thank you very much, and thank you for having me. And I hope this answers the questions that you were looking for and gives everybody a little bit of help. Bye now.